August 6th, 1945. 8:14 hours. Hiroshima, Japan. The morning is perfect. Temperature, 26 degrees Celsius. Humidity, 80%. Visibility, unlimited. Not a cloud mars the crystalline sky above the city of 350,000 souls. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida stands on the balcony of the Hiroshima Military District headquarters, coffee steaming in his hand. He is the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, the architect of Japan's greatest victory, a warrior whose name is spoken with reverence across the Imperial Navy. He watches a single B-29 traverse the sky at 31,000 feet, its contrail a white line drawn across blue canvas. Just one bomber. Alone, unescorted, moving with the leisurely confidence of a transport aircraft, not a combat mission. Fuchida smiles. The Americans have grown careless, or perhaps desperate, sending single bombers now. Conservation of dwindling resources. Japan's intelligence reports confirm it. America is exhausted, stretched thin across the Pacific, suffering losses they cannot sustain. The air raid sirens remain silent. One bomber poses no threat. Hiroshima's anti-aircraft batteries do not engage. Fighters do not scramble. The city continues its morning routine. Workers walking to factories, children heading to school, shopkeepers opening their stores. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, the Enola releases a single bomb. Fuchida sees it fall, a dark speck tumbling from the aircraft's belly, tumbling toward the city center, insignificant against the vast sky. He raises his coffee cup to his lips. The sky turns white. The Empire's certainty in December 1941, when Fuchida's aircraft had swept over Pearl Harbor and obliterated the American Pacific Fleet, Japanese Naval Command possessed absolute confidence in their strategic calculations. The mathematics appeared irrefutable. Japan controlled the Pacific from Manchuria to the Solomon Islands, an empire spanning 7.7 million square kilometers. The Imperial Japanese Navy fielded 10 aircraft carriers, 11 battleships, and 1,500 combat aircraft operated by the finest naval aviators in the world. Japanese fighter pilots averaged 800 flight hours before combat deployment. American pilots averaged 200. Japanese torpedoes, the Type 93 Long Lance, could strike targets at 40 kilometers with 500-kilogram warheads. American torpedoes frequently failed to detonate. Japanese Zero fighters could outmaneuver, outclimb, and outrange any aircraft in the American inventory. Japanese training emphasized spiritual discipline, tactical perfection, and warrior culture dating back to the samurai. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, understood American industrial capacity better than most. He had studied at Harvard and served as naval attaché in Washington. His warning was explicit: I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success. But Yamamoto's superiors dismissed his concerns. They had calculated the ratios. America possessed greater industrial capacity, yes, but America was soft, decadent, a nation of individualists who valued comfort over sacrifice, profit over honor, democracy over discipline. Americans would not endure the casualties required for Pacific warfare. They would not sacrifice their sons on remote islands for strategic positions most could not locate on a map. Japan would achieve decisive victories in the first 6 months, demonstrate the futility of resistance, and negotiate a favorable peace from a position of strength. America would accept reality and withdraw. The plan was rational. The calculations were sound. The ideology was unshakable. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, chief tactical planner for the Pearl Harbor attack, submitted his assessment in January 1942. We have achieved our objective. 8 American battleships destroyed or damaged. 2,403 American casualties. American prestige shattered. Their Pacific fleet will require 2 years minimum to rebuild. By that time, our defensive perimeter will be impregnable. Emperor Hirohito received the report with satisfaction. The war was proceeding according to plan. Then came the first anomaly. April 18, 1942. Doolittle's raid. 16 American B-25 bombers, medium bombers, not designed for carrier operations, launched from the USS Hornet 650 miles from Japan and struck Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Nagoya. The material damage was negligible. 90 buildings damaged. 50 civilians killed. No strategic impact, but the psychological impact was devastating. American bombers over Tokyo for months after Pearl Harbor. It should have been impossible. American carriers should have been hiding in San Diego, licking their wounds, rebuilding their shattered fleet. Instead, they were 650 miles off Japan's coast, launching attacks that Japanese intelligence had classified as technically unfeasible. Imperial Navy Command convened emergency meetings. How had American carriers penetrated Japanese defensive perimeters undetected? How had medium bombers launched from carrier decks? How had the Americans developed such audacity so quickly after catastrophic defeat? The questions went unanswered, but the certainty began to crack. Then came Midway. June 4th, 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Exactly the time frame Yamamoto had specified. Japanese intelligence reported that American carrier strength in the Pacific consisted of 2 operational carriers, Enterprise and Hornet. Yorktown had been severely damaged at Coral Sea and would require months of repair. The intelligence was wrong. Yorktown arrived at Midway after 72 hours of emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor, repairs that should have required 3 months. American shipyard workers had performed miracles of improvisation, welding patches, rerouting systems, restoring combat capability through methods that violated every principle of proper naval engineering. When Japanese dive bombers struck the American carrier force on June 4th, they encountered 3 carriers, not 2, and American dive bombers. Launching from those 3 carriers, caught 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, with their flight decks crowded with armed and fueled aircraft. Within 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning. Within 24 hours, all 4 were at the bottom of the Pacific. Japan lost 248 aircraft and 3,057 men, including many of the irreplaceable veteran pilots who had struck Pearl Harbor. The balance of power in the Pacific shifted in 6 minutes. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commander of the 2nd Carrier Division, sent his final message before going down with Hiryu. I alone am responsible for this defeat. But know this, the Americans we face today are not the Americans of our intelligence reports. They fight with desperation we did not anticipate and resources we cannot match. He tied himself to the captain's chair and rode the carrier into the darkness. Tokyo received the Midway casualty reports with disbelief. For carriers lost in a single day, impossible. The Americans were defeated, demoralized, incapable of offensive operations. Except they had just demonstrated the opposite, and they were only beginning. The first revelation, Corporal Takashi Yamada, crouched in his bunker on Guadalcanal in October 1942, staring at an apparition that defiled every assumption about American weakness. The invasion fleet stretched to the horizon. Not dozens of ships, hundreds. Transport vessels, cargo ships, tankers, destroyers, cruisers, and carriers forming an armada that seemed to materialize from empty ocean like a nightmare, given physical form. Yamada had been told Americans were soft, that they lacked fighting spirit, that their industrial capacity was exaggerated propaganda. For 3 days, he watched them unload supplies on the beaches. Not stacks of crates. Mountains. Hills of ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, construction equipment, prefabricated buildings, vehicles, aircraft parts, and materials Yamada could not identify. American engineers bulldozed jungle and poured concrete runways within 48 hours. American Seabees erected complete base facilities, mess halls, hospitals, command centers, repair shops, while Japanese artillery still ranged the beaches. The Americans did not dig defensive positions and wait. They built, constantly, obsessively, as if abundance was their natural state and scarcity an alien concept. Yamada's unit received supplies by submarine once every 3 weeks. Rice, ammunition, occasional medical supplies. American forces received supply shipments daily. Multiple shipments. Continuous rivers of material flowing from ships to shore to forward positions without pause. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal were allocated 600 grams of rice per day. American soldiers received 3 hot meals daily, each containing more calories than Yamada's entire daily ration. Americans had ice cream, Coca-Cola, fresh fruit flown in from Australia, medical care that seemed miraculous, antibiotics, blood transfusions, surgical facilities that would be considered advanced in Tokyo. On October 23rd, Yamada's position was overrun. He was wounded, shrapnel in his leg, infections spreading rapidly. He expected execution or slow death from neglect. Instead, an American medic treated his wounds with sulfa drugs Yamada had never seen, bandaged him with clean supplies, and transported him to a field hospital where a surgeon operated under electric lights powered by portable generators. The surgeon saved his leg. Yamada's interrogation began 3 days later. The American intelligence officer spoke broken Japanese and asked routine questions. Unit designation, commander's name, defensive positions. But Yamada could not focus on the questions. He was transfixed by what lay beyond the tent. The American base that had grown like a living organism while he recovered. Bulldozers carved roads through jungle. Trucks moved in continuous convoys. Aircraft landed and departed every few minutes. How? Yamada asked in English he had learned in school. How do you have so much? The intelligence officer smiled tiredly. We're Americans. Having too much is what we do. It was not arrogance. It was simple statement of fact. Yamada was transferred to a POW camp in Australia, where he spent the next 3 years observing a truth that shattered every ideological certainty he had been taught. America was not fighting a war. America was demonstrating industrial capacity. The Pacific Campaign was not a military operation. It was a logistical exhibition, a systematic proof that democratic abundance could overwhelm disciplined scarcity through sheer material superiority. His letters home, censored but still devastating, began reaching Japan in early 1943. We were told Americans cannot fight. This is false. Americans do not fight like us, with discipline and spiritual strength. They fight with machines and supplies. They replace losses faster than we can inflict them. When we destroy 1 tank, 3 arrive. When we shoot down 1 aircraft, 5 appear. This is not courage against courage. This is civilization against civilization. And we are losing because our civilization runs on sacrifice while there's runs on abundance. The letters were intercepted by Japanese military censors. Yamada's family never received them. But thousands of similar letters were arriving from across the Pacific, Toa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. And even censorship could not suppress the truth bleeding through every line. Japan was not fighting the United States military. Japan was fighting the United States economy. And economies cannot be defeated by courage. The industrial apocalypse by 1944, American industrial dominance had transformed from advantage to annihilation. The numbers ceased being statistics and became existential horror. In 1943, American shipyards launched 1,949 vessels, totaling 19.2 million tons. Japan launched 769,000 tons. American production exceeded Japanese output by 25 to 1. American aircraft factories delivered 85,898 aircraft in 1943. Japan produced 16,693. Ratio, 5.1 to 1. But raw numbers obscured the deeper truth. American production was accelerating while Japanese capacity collapsed. By 1944, American monthly aircraft production peaked at 9,113 units, more aircraft in 30 days than Japan produced in all of 1942. American submarine production exceeded 50 vessels per year. American destroyer production exceeded 2 per week. Liberty ships, Cargo vessels built in modular sections by semi-skilled workers were being completed in an average of 42 days from keel laying to launch. The SS Robert E. Peary was built in 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. For days, Japanese intelligence officers reviewing these figures assumed they were disinformation. No industrial system could achieve such output. The claims violated physical possibility. Except the ships kept arriving. Commander Toshikazu Ami, a Japanese naval strategist, later wrote, "We calculated that American production would require 3 years to replace Pearl Harbor losses. They required 4 months. We calculated their maximum sustainable production at 40,000 aircraft annually. They produced 96,000. Every calculation we made was wrong because we could not conceive of an economy organized for abundance rather than efficiency. German engineers optimized production to eliminate waste. Japanese craftsmen emphasized quality and precision. Americans simply built more. If a design was 80% adequate, they mass-produced it immediately rather than waiting for perfection. If workers lacked training, they simplified the task rather than extending training time. If a factory reached capacity, they built another factory. We were playing chess. They were playing flood. The strategic implications were catastrophic. Every Japanese aircraft destroyed required replacement from dwindling production capacity. Every American aircraft destroyed was replaced within days from inexhaustible reserves. Japanese pilots became progressively more experienced as they survived battles. American pilot quality declined as training time shortened, but it did not matter because American pilots flew aircraft with better radios, better armor, better support, and better logistics. By 1944, Japanese pilots flew with 200 hours of training and faced combat alone, without radar guidance, without reliable communication, without search and rescue support if they were shot down. American pilots flew with 400 hours of training, guided by shipborne radar, coordinated through clear radio networks, protected by fighter cover, and supported by rescue submarines positioned to recover downed aircrew. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, one of the war's highest-scoring aces, described an encounter over the Philippines in October 1944. "I attacked what appeared to be a lone American bomber. Before I could fire, 6 Hellcat fighters materialized from clouds, directed by radar I could not detect. I evaded and dove toward the ocean. 4 more Hellcats climbed from below, again, perfectly positioned, as if they knew my escape route before I chose it. I returned to base with 127 bullet holes in my aircraft and fuel for 3 more minutes of flight. I had been outnumbered, outcoordinated, and outmatched, not because American pilots were superior. I was more experienced than all of them combined, but because their system was superior. I was one man with skill. They were a network with abundance. Skill cannot defeat networks. Experience cannot defeat systems. The naval war became a massacre. Japanese submarines, operating with precision and discipline, sank 184 Allied vessels totaling 907,000 tons during the entire war. American submarines sank 1,178 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 5.3 million tons, 60% of Japan's entire merchant fleet. By 1945, Japan's supply lines had collapsed. Oil imports dropped to 3% of 1941 levels. Food imports ceased. Industrial production declined 75% due to lack of raw materials. Japan was being starved into submission. And then came the bombers. When the sky became Fire the B-29 Superfortress was never supposed to exist. At 99,000 pounds fully loaded, with a wingspan of 141 feet and pressurized cabin for high-altitude operations, it represented engineering ambition beyond rational calculation. The aircraft cost $639,000 per unit, equivalent to $10.5 million in 2025 dollars. It required 4 2,200 horsepower engines. It could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs 3,250 miles. Japan had nothing comparable. No aircraft could match its range, altitude, or payload. No fighter could intercept it effectively at its operating ceiling of 33,000 feet. In March 1945, American commanders made a calculated decision: abandon precision daylight bombing and implement nighttime area bombing with incendiaries. Tokyo was not a military target. Tokyo was a city of wood and paper where 1.5 million civilians lived in structures that would burn like kindling. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, 334 B-29 bombers struck Tokyo with 1,665 tons of incendiaries. The firestorm reached temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Canals boiled, glass melted, people in bomb shelters suffocated as fire consumed all oxygen. Those who fled into streets were caught in winds exceeding hurricane force, drawn toward the fire's heart. 83,793 people died that night, more than at Hiroshima, more than at Nagasaki. The bombing continued. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, Kawasaki. 64 Japanese cities were systematically burned. Civilian casualties exceeded 300,000. 9 million people became homeless. And still the bombers came. Colonel Tokugawa Yasutoshi, a Japanese air defense commander, wrote in his journal on April 12, 1945, "We shot down 11 B-29s last night. Intelligence reports indicate America has 2,865 B-29s in production or operational. We destroyed 11. They have 2,854. At this rate, we must shoot down 80 bombers per night, every night for 1 year to exhaust their force. We cannot shoot down 80 per night. On our best night, we manage 17. And each B-29 we destroy is replaced within days. Each of our fighters destroyed is irreplaceable. We are swatting at a swarm of locusts with a stick. The swarm continues because the locusts are infinite." By July 1945, American bombers were dropping leaflets on Japanese cities warning civilians of upcoming attacks. They named the cities. They specified the dates. And they bombed exactly as promised, because Japanese air defenses had been so thoroughly degraded that American bombers operated with impunity, announcing their targets in advance as a psychological weapon. The message was clear: resistance is futile. We can destroy you at our leisure. Your military cannot stop us. Your defenses are irrelevant. Surrender, or we will erase you city by city until nothing remains. It was not warfare. It was industrial extinction. The letter that never arrived. Lieutenant Kazuo Sakamaki sat in a POW camp in Wisconsin in July 1945, writing letters to his family in Osaka. He was the first Japanese POW of the war, captured at Pearl Harbor after his midget submarine ran aground. For 3.5 years, he had been held in American camps, observing a civilization that contradicted everything he had been taught. His letters described American abundance with the stunned precision of an anthropologist discovering an alien species. The guards receive wages sufficient to own automobiles. Private automobiles. A corporal, equivalent to our lowest rank, owns a machine that would mark him as wealthy in Japan. This is normal here. Expected. They discard food we would consider luxurious. I witnessed soldiers throwing away half-eaten steaks, fresh bread, fruit. When I asked why, they said they were full. Not saving it for later. Not preserving it. Simply discarding abundance. Their factories operate continuously. 3 shifts, 24 hours. I can see factory lights from the camp at all hours. The production never stops. They do not rest on Sunday. They do not observe holidays. They simply produce endlessly, as if output itself is their religion. His letter from July 28, 1945, described his location being changed. They're moving us to a new camp. Not because this camp is needed, but because they have too many camps and wish to consolidate. Too many camps. Too many facilities. Too much of everything. Mother, I must tell you truth, I have resisted for 3 years. We cannot win this war. Not because we lack courage or discipline, but because we are fighting a nation that has transformed abundance into weaponry. They do not fight with spirit. They fight with factories. And factories, once started, cannot be stopped by bravery. The letter was censored. His mother never received it. She died in the Osaka firebombing of March 13th to 14th, 1945, when 274 B-29s dropped 1,733 tons of incendiaries on the city, killing 3,987 civilians and destroying 134,000 homes. Sakamaki learned of her death in August from a Red Cross notification. He was sitting in the camp mess hall when the news arrived. Around him, American soldiers ate breakfast: eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, orange juice. An abundance so routine they did not notice it. He excused himself, walked to his barracks, and wept for 3 hours. Not just for his mother, but for an entire civilization that had convinced itself that discipline could defeat abundance, that spirit could overcome industry, that ideology could substitute for material reality. His nation had sent millions to die, believing a beautiful lie, that Japanese superiority would prevail through force of will. He now knew the truth. Will meant nothing against a nation that could produce 96,000 aircraft in a year, launch 3 cargo ships daily, and feed its soldiers steak while prisoners of war received better rations than Japanese civilians. The moment everything changed, August 6th, 1945, 8:16 hours. Hiroshima. Fuchida never saw the flash. He was too close. The detonation of Little Boy, a uranium-235 fission weapon yielding 15 kilotons, created a fireball reaching temperatures of 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The blast wave traveled at 1,100 feet per second. The thermal radiation pulse caused spontaneous combustion of exposed combustible materials within 1.2 miles of ground zero. 70,000 people died instantly. Another 70,000 would die from radiation and injuries over the following months. But the death toll was not the revelation. The revelation was that one bomber, carrying one bomb, had achieved destruction that previously required hundreds of bombers carrying thousands of bombs. The entire mathematics of warfare had become obsolete in 43 seconds. Japanese military command received initial reports with confusion. Communications from Hiroshima had ceased. Rail lines were severed. But this was not unusual. Bombing raids frequently disrupted communications. Then reconnaissance aircraft overflew the city. The pilot's report reached Tokyo at 15:30 hours. Hiroshima has been destroyed. The entire city center has vanished. There's only ash and rubble extending for miles. I can identify no structures. I can see no survivors. It appears that a meteor has struck the city. Not a bombing raid. Not conventional weapons. Something else. Something unprecedented. President Truman's statement, broadcast globally on August 6th, explained, 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The statement continued with a promise and a threat. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Japan's Supreme War Council convened emergency sessions. Some argued the Americans were bluffing. They could not possess more than one such weapon. The cost, the complexity, the scientific requirements would limit production to a single demonstration device. On August 9th, a B-29 named Boxcar dropped Fat Man, a plutonium implosion weapon, on Nagasaki, killing 40,000 instantly and destroying a city that had been considered a secondary target. 2 cities, 2 bombs, 5 days. The message was inescapable. America possessed multiple atomic weapons and the will to use them until Japan surrendered unconditionally. Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori addressed the emperor on August 9th. Your Majesty, we have received intelligence estimates regarding American atomic capability. If their current production matches their demonstrated capacity in conventional weapons, they can maintain atomic attacks indefinitely. We cannot survive this. Emperor Hirohito made his decision that night. In a recorded radio address broadcast August 15th, the first time most Japanese citizens had heard their emperor's voice, he announced surrender. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. Japan surrendered not because of battlefield defeats, not because of firebombing, not even because of the atomic bombs alone. Japan surrendered because atomic weapons proved that American industrial capacity had transcended conventional warfare entirely. If America could develop, produce, and deploy atomic weapons while simultaneously conducting the largest conventional military campaign in history, if they could do both simultaneously without apparent strain, then resistance was not just futile. Resistance was civilizational suicide. The Americans had not simply defeated Japan. They had revealed that industrial democracies, when fully mobilized, could literally harness the power of the universe. The silence after. Takeshi Yamada returned to Japan in 1946, repatriated from Australian POW camps along with 140,000 other former soldiers. The nation he found was unrecognizable. Tokyo was ash. Osaka was rubble. Hiroshima was a crater. Nagasaki was a cemetery. 66 cities had been systematically destroyed. Industrial capacity had declined 85% from 1941 levels. Food production had collapsed. Disease was rampant. Starvation was widespread. And occupying this devastation were American soldiers. But they were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They distributed food. They provided medical care. They rebuilt infrastructure. General Douglas MacArthur arrived with plans not for subjugation, but for transformation, democratic constitution, land reform, educational restructuring, industrial rehabilitation. The Americans fed the nation that had tried to kill them. Yamada stood in line for American rations in Yokohama in December 1946. The soldier distributing food was younger than him, perhaps 20 years old, Midwestern accent, friendly demeanor. Rough war, the soldier said, handing over a box of supplies. Yamada nodded, unable to speak. The box contained rice, canned meat, powdered milk, chocolate, and cigarettes. More food than Yamada had seen in months. Provided freely, without rancor, by the nation Japan had attacked without declaration of war. Why? Yamada asked in broken English. Why help us? The soldier shrugged. Orders. But also, what's the alternative? Let you starve? We're not animals. This was the final revelation. American abundance extended even to former enemies. The same productive capacity that had built 296,000 aircraft and 88,000 tanks was now building democratic institutions, economic systems, and peaceful prosperity in nations that had sought to destroy it. The Marshall Plan for Japan, officially the Economic Rehabilitation in Occupied Areas Program, delivered $2.2 billion in aid between 1946 and 1952, equivalent to $29 billion in 2025. American advisors restructured Japan's economy, dissolved the Zaibatsu monopolies, implemented land reforms, and established educational systems based on democratic principles. By 1952, Japan's industrial production exceeded pre-war levels. By 1960, Japan was the world's third-largest economy. By 1980, Japanese automobiles and electronics dominated global markets, built using manufacturing principles learned from American industrial advisors during the occupation. Saburo Sakai, the fighter ace who had fought American Hellcats over the Philippines, opened an automotive parts factory in 1955 using American manufacturing techniques. He employed 340 workers, many of them former soldiers. In a 1982 interview, he reflected, "We lost because we believed ideology could overcome reality. We thought discipline and spirit made us superior. But superiority is not spiritual, it is material." America proved that free people, working in their own interest within market systems, generate abundance that centralized planning cannot match. We learned this lesson at terrible cost, but we learned it. And applying that lesson, we built the modern Japan. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who had witnessed Hiroshima's destruction from a vantage point that should have killed him, survived the war and became a Christian missionary in 1950. He traveled across America, speaking to churches about reconciliation and forgiveness. When asked how he could forgive the nation that had dropped atomic bombs on his homeland, he said, "I forgave because I understood." America did not wage war for conquest. They waged war for survival and the preservation of freedom. And when war ended, they offered their defeated enemy not vengeance, but rehabilitation. This taught me more about American character than all the battles we fought. The inheritance. In 1960, the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan formalized their alliance. Former enemies became allies because both nations had learned the central lesson of the Pacific War. Democratic nations possessing industrial capacity and moral legitimacy cannot be defeated by authoritarian systems that substitute ideology for reality. Japan's post-war economic miracle was built on this understanding. Japanese engineers studied American mass production. Japanese businessmen adopted American management techniques. Japanese educators implemented American educational philosophies. But they added Japanese refinement. American volume met Japanese quality. The synthesis created an economic powerhouse that would reshape global manufacturing. By 1980, Japan produced more automobiles than America. By 1985, Japanese electronics dominated consumer markets. By 1990, Japanese manufacturing efficiency set global standards. The student had surpassed the teacher, not through conquest, but through learning the teacher's lessons and perfecting them. American General Curtis LeMay, the architect of the firebombing campaign that had killed hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians, visited Japan in 1964 to advise on building Japan's air self-defense force. He was received not as a war criminal, but as a technical consultant. A Japanese reporter asked how he felt returning to a nation he had nearly destroyed. LeMay responded, "War is cruelty. There is no use trying to reform it. The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over. I did what was necessary to end the war. The Japanese did what they believed necessary. Both sides paid terrible prices. But now we're allies, and that's what matters." The reporter pressed, "Did he regret the firebombings?" LeMay paused. "I regret that they were necessary. I regret the war happened at all. But I don't regret ending it as quickly as possible." Every day the war continued. More people died, Japanese and American. The bombs, terrible as they were, saved lives by stopping the killing. This was the American perspective. War was not glory but necessity, not honor but horror, not purpose but tragedy to be ended as swiftly as possible through overwhelming force. Japanese philosopher Watsuji Tetsuro wrote in 1963, "The Americans taught us that warfare is not a test of spiritual strength, but a failure of civilizational dialogue. They demonstrated that industrial capacity is not evil, but neutral. It can destroy or build, depending on the values guiding its application. And they proved that victory without magnanimity is hollow, while defeat accepted with humility can become transformation." By 2025, Japan stands as testimony to these lessons. A nation that embraced American democratic principles, adopted American industrial methods, preserved Japanese cultural identity, and emerged as a prosperous, peaceful, technologically advanced society that has not waged war in 80 years. The transformation from militarist empire to pacifist democracy required fire and atomic revelation. But it succeeded because the victors offered rehabilitation rather than retribution. The truth that burns forever. The Pacific War proved what the European War had demonstrated. Free societies, when threatened with annihilation, mobilize productive capacity that authoritarian systems cannot match. Not because democracy is inherently superior in all contexts. Not because capitalism is morally perfect. Not because American culture is universally applicable. but because systems that harness individual initiative, market competition, and voluntary cooperation generate abundance, while systems built on coercion, central planning, and ideological conformity generate scarcity. Japan learned this in fire. Germany learned this in rubble. The Soviet Union learned this in economic collapse. Every authoritarian system that challenged democratic industrial capacity has failed, not because dictatorships lack courage or discipline, but because dictatorships cannot mobilize human creativity, adaptability, and innovation at the scale that free markets and open societies achieve naturally. The B-29s over Japan were not just bombers. They were proof that a nation of immigrants, speaking dozens of languages, practicing different religions, pursuing individual prosperity, governed by messy democratic processes, that such a nation could produce more, innovate faster, and fight longer than an empire built on racial purity and spiritual unity. The atomic bombs were not just weapons. They were demonstrations that scientific research conducted in open universities by international teams of physicists could achieve what centralized military research could not. The Manhattan Project employed scientists who had fled fascism: Einstein, Fermi, Szilard, Teller. Refugees from tyranny built the weapon that ended tyranny's expansion. And the post-war reconstruction was not just charity. It was validation. Validation that American abundance was not finite but generative. That helping defeated enemies rebuild created stable partners and peaceful prosperity. That the same industrial capacity that had destroyed cities could rebuild them better than before. Takeshi Yamada died in 2003 at age 82. A successful businessman, grandfather of 5, witness to Japan's transformation from ashes to prosperity. His final interview, given to a university historian in 2002, included this reflection. I spent 3 years in American POW camps. I received better treatment there than Japanese soldiers received in our own military. I was fed better as a prisoner than I had been as a soldier. I received medical care our officers did not provide our own wounded. This taught me that the war was not America versus Japan. It was two civilizational models in conflict. One model said, the strong dominate the weak, resources are scarce, victory requires sacrifice and discipline. The other model said, abundance is possible, cooperation is beneficial, freedom generates prosperity. We fought for the first model and lost everything. They fought for the second model and won, then share their victory with us. The lesson is eternal. Tyranny creates scarcity. Freedom creates abundance. And in the long run, abundance always prevails. When the sky turned white, the flash over Hiroshima lasted 43 seconds. In that moment, 70,000 lives ended and an entire civilization's illusions vanished. But what emerged from those ashes was not continued enmity, but unprecedented transformation. Japan chose not to repeat the mistakes that had led to catastrophe. America chose not to inflict the vengeance that history would have justified. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone. Proof that former enemies can become partners, that destruction can precede reconstruction, and that the lessons learned in fire can illuminate paths to peace. Today, Japanese students study in American universities. American companies build factories in Japan. Veterans from both sides meet annually at Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima memorials, not to celebrate war, but to affirm peace. The bombers that once darkened Pacific skies are museums now, monuments to the industrial capacity that ended history's deadliest war. The pilots who flew them are grandfathers, their stories testimony to courage and sacrifice on all sides. And the lesson burns eternal, carved into history by fire and atomic light. Those who fight for conquest carry only the strength of armies. Those who fight for freedom carry the strength of nations. And when nations mobilize their full capacity, their industries, their values, their inexhaustible human creativity, they generate a power that ideology cannot match, discipline cannot overcome, and tyranny cannot defeat. The sky turned white over Hiroshima not because America possessed better scientists or braver soldiers, but because democracies, when threatened with annihilation, transform abundance into survival and survival into victory. This truth, purchased at terrible cost and proven in atomic fire, remains immutable. Freedom, however chaotic and imperfect, will always outlast tyranny, because free people build while captive people only serve. And builders, in the end, inherit the earth.